A lot of people are dreaming about going to the polar regions. Me too, coming from Nagpur, with our 40 plus degrees heat in summer, have always been in pursuit of the poles. But the pursuit of the poles now for me is more about the pursuit of understanding the poles. So today I'm going to take you on a little journey on the polar regions and I'll try to explain why we go there and what is it that we do when we go to the polar regions. So this is a little video which helps you to see the kind of sheer magnificence of this place that we consider our happy place. And this really, the place that you will see in a second, is my happy place, is the Lemaire Channel in Antarctica. There is no beauty bigger than this place for me. All of the pictures that you see will be lovely with blue skies, but that's not the reality. You get some really bad weather many of the times. It's just that you can't take pictures in weather like this. So that's why when you see pictures from the polar regions, you'll find beautiful blue skies, amazing ice, and everything looking really perfect. And that's only part of the reality. This is also something to note that in my pictures, you will not see any of the rough seas, for example. Nothing rougher than what you're seeing now, because I get really seasick. I've been called a bad oceanographer, and I guess I am, because I get seasick on anything more than a gentle wave in the ocean. But I still do my work there, and I have been doing for the past 20 plus years. You will find a similar beauty in the Arctic as well as the Antarctic. And you have the same problems. You have bad weather also in the Arctic. So again, even if you see those beautiful pictures, keep in the back of your mind that that's only part of what it's all about. So what exactly are the Arctic and Antarctic regions? So the Arctic is sea, which is you have a lot of land which is around a sea in the center. And the place that I normally work is shown with a little circle on the map. It's the island called Svalbard or Spitsbergen. It's up near the top of Greenland. What's Antarctica? Antarctica is almost the opposite because it's land surrounded by sea. And this is because there's no barriers with continents to this sea. This sea the Southern Ocean has a free flow around Antarctica. And so it becomes one of the fastest flowing oceans in the world. And particularly when it reaches the Drake Passage, which is in between, if you consider this as South America and this is the peninsula of Antarctica, all of those ocean currents get squeezed into a tiny little gap, which makes it one of the worst seas in the world to be in. And guess the area that I work in. It's right there. It's in the Scotia Sea around the Antarctic Peninsula, and this is where I normally, if I go south, that's where I spend my time. What do I do on a daily basis? I act as a knowledge broker. So basically, I look at the science, I understand the science, I look at what policymakers are doing, and I understand what they want from the science, and I act as a broker between the two. I translate the languages of a scientist into that of policymaking, and vice versa as well. So I translate the language of policymakers back to the scientists. So everyone understands what's going on. A lot of this takes place under the banner of international cooperation or knowledge brokering. And I get to visit some really amazing places and meetings as well. Obviously, due to COVID, all of those things went online. So we still continued our work, except that we were speaking to everyone online. Now, how do we go to the polar regions? We go with massive ships like this. And you'll notice that there are little arrows on the top right-hand corner of all of the pictures that I'm showing you. These arrows indicate if it points up, it's the north, and if it points down, that particular picture is from the south. And this picture signifies both, because this ship around, it's a ship from South Korea. It goes both to the Arctic and the Antarctic. I had the pleasure of visiting this ship a few years ago. We also use proper metal-hulled ships, and there's also tall ships that go both to Antarctica and to the northern regions. This is a picture from near Svalbard. We also have massive tourist ships that go to both the north and south as well. While this picture is from the south, it is equally prevalent in the north as well. And it's a good thing because the tourists can act as ambassadors for the region. They can tell everyone how beautiful and how fragile the polar regions are. The tourism operators also support science to quite a large extent. So they'll have a lot of citizen science on board, for example. And you can go in small sailing boats. I hope you can see it. If not, that's the sailing boat, and it just shows you the scale of things in the polar regions. We know how fragile this region is, yet why do we continue to go there? Polar regions signify one of the few places in the world where exploration and science come together. It's that first thrill of knowing something. It's that first thrill of going somewhere and understanding what it's all about. Up to now, you've seen all of the pictures that are white and that I would consider as what you would think as the polar regions. It's a lot of ice, cold water, but it's not all like this. There's a whole lot of plant life, and this is from the Arctic that you see here. Lots of flowering plants in the Arctic. Also mushrooms, and you'll find a lot of lichens there. And of course, there's a lot of bird life. So this is a picture of these cliffs. And on these cliffs, every little white dot that you can see is a bird that's shown on the inset. There's thousands upon thousands of birds on this one cliff. There's also so many other birds. One of my favorites is the top right corner. It's called the tern, Arctic tern or Antarctic tern. It's a tiny little bird, but it makes one of the longest journeys on the planet. It goes from the Arctic up to the Antarctic and back every year. Just listening to it makes me tired out. There's also obviously other animals like reindeer. So Svalbard has quite a few reindeer on it, and they eat during summer, and they use that fat reserve to get them through the winter when food is quite scarce. There's also other things like walruses and everything else. You obviously have heard about polar bears. Remember one thing, if I ever hear polar bears, they are in the north and penguins are in the south. They don't meet. They're very separate. They keep to their own places. Polar bears to the north, penguins to the south. Antarctica is also green in some parts. So it's not just the ice and cold. It also has types of moss. It also has a few grasses. Of course, you know the bird life there. When we go to the polar regions, all of the scientists know that we leave footprints there. We have an environmental footprint when we go and do research. And I think this picture is quite evocative of that for me. When you have this beautiful picturesque snow which is laying there, and then someone's gone and walked through it. But this is what happens. We leave an environmental footprint. And as scientists, we are very, very careful. We consider it our duty to be very careful. We consider why we are going south, whether it's necessary to go south, and we make huge efforts to reduce our environmental footprint to the best of our abilities. The polar regions act as natural laboratories, places where we can go and study where it's been untouched by humans. There's very few places like that on the planet, but they are quite common on both the Arctic and Antarctic side. We go and study things. My friend here is collecting these tiny little creatures that you can see on the rock. All of these creatures that live in the polar regions have evolved ways of adapting to the cold. So they synthesize, say for example, enzymes that work better in the cold. And these kind of biomaterials, so enzymes and things like that, have a really high value in commercial life, because these don't need as high a temperature for working as many other things do. We also have a lot of marine life. There's tiny little creatures. While this is from the north, in the south you'll find little prawn-like creatures that are called krill. All of these small things that are in the water act as keystone species. They're the ones that feed everything. They're the ones that feed everything from the penguins you love to the whales and the seals, and they keep that whole food chain going. Fisheries are managed quite heavily in the Antarctic. It's an organization called the Commission for Conservation of Marine Living Resources. They have recently, in 2016, declared a very large marine protected area in the Southern Ocean. Same way in the Arctic as well, in the Central Arctic Ocean, there is an area that has been put aside where there is a complete moratorium on fishing for 16 years. And that gives the scientists an opportunity to understand what the ecosystem there is, how it works, and to understand whether that area can be fished sustainably for the future or not. You've obviously heard of the ozone hole, right? So this is a little video recording of how the ozone hole over Antarctica goes in a year's time. The ozone hole was discovered in Antarctica, and it's the result of the understanding of what destruction of ozone can do. The entire globe, nearly the entire globe, came together in something called the Montreal Protocol to make sure that we don't have those ozone destroying compounds in the atmosphere. Because the Montreal Protocol was so successful, the ozone hole is expected to heal up on its own, but it will take many decades more. So we still need to be careful. This picture is blank on purpose. This is because it shows the absence of light pollution in Antarctica, particularly Antarctic. Also the Arctic, but particularly Antarctica. A huge experiment called the Ice Cube Neutrino experiment takes place at the South Pole Research Station. And that tries to look at neutrinos that come from space onto the planet. Neutrinos are sent out when there is an event of like a explosion in space somewhere, so you can study those events of high magnitude in space through looking at these neutrinos. Continuing with the astrophysics theme, when we have research stations that can only be reached at certain times, and in the Antarctic you have people that go there for the winter get isolated for winter. So they spend several months without any contact with anyone else outside of their own little station. And this is a good example. This is a Polish polar station, Hornsund in Svalbard, which is quite isolated. And this helps us, this isolation helps people understand how people will behave when they're isolated. So this informs direct research, for example, for spaceships that go to Mars, where there is going to be a long-term isolation. That's where we study what the effects of this long-term isolation can be. We also look at ice and the atmospheric gases that are trapped in ice. When the snow falls in both north and south, it settles down and compacts. And when it compacts and makes ice, there are tiny little bubbles of gas that are trapped inside that ice. Scientists can go in and by sampling inside each bubble, they get a very accurate picture of what was happening in the atmosphere at the time of formation of that ice. And one of a very exciting project is currently looking at trying to find a million-year ice core. We've never had a million-year ice core so far. So they're hoping to go back 1 million years in ice cores. We also look at things like sea level rise. Now that is something that will impact all of us. A huge portion of humanity lives in coastal areas. Our closest neighbor, Bangladesh, has a very high population that is susceptible to sea level rise. The glaciers that exist in the north and south are known to contribute a very high level towards this rising sea level. So this is something that's also studied, both north and south. And I've shown you some pictures of ships in front of the glaciers so you understand the magnitude of these glaciers. They are huge, and it's difficult to overstate how big these things are. So this picture shows you a tiny little yellow dot inside that red circle that I've marked out. There's a couple of yellow dots in there. Those are little zodiac boats with people in them. And the capacity of these glaciers to really contribute to sea level rise. Both the north and south play a very large role in the global ocean circulation system. They act as air conditioners for the planet. There might be some drastic effects coming in the future, but there's also positive news. There are steps that can be taken by governments. Organizations like the UN organizations, the IPCC, they are working towards these steps. There's a really nice message from the IPCC. The polar regions are losing ice, and the oceans are changing rapidly. And the consequences of this polar transition extends to the entire world. It doesn't remain just in the polar regions. This is my last slide. And I would like to say, dream about large goals. Don't let anyone tell you you can't do things. When I was young, everyone is like, you can't go to the polar regions. They're so far, it's so stressful. It's not a journey that's so easy. But I didn't let anyone pull me down. I did it. I got my goal. This is me, the first time on continental Antarctica. And with this picture, I wanted to show everyone that there are people who look like you and I who go there. So there's nothing that's going to stop you except yourself. So have the confidence and don't let anyone pull you down. Go and achieve what you want to achieve and what you dream of. Thank you.